would think either the price is going to rise of silver or else the supply is coming down with this type of inflation, which doesn't seem anywhere end in sight. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And in the midst of a soaring commodities market, higher oil prices, somewhat higher gold and silver prices, yet interesting factor because as the oil price goes up, what does that do to the supply side in silver? Because that means costs are rising for the silver miners. A lot going on there, which obviously if you're waiting for a representative from JP Goldman's Reserve, my loving title for JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Federal Reserve, or any of the government institutions to explain that to you, that's a formula for financial ruin because Joe Biden is still claiming that he's going to rein in inflation. I've not seen any details explaining how that is going to happen. So, again, maybe he's listening to Jerome Powell of the Fed, who thought he had inflation under control. Obviously, as I've talked about in the show plenty, and my guest who's joining me today, David Stein. David, you've talked plenty about how you saw inflation getting out of control years before Jerome Powell did as well. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's we've been seeing hints of it for many years now, and it's definitely no surprise that it's becoming a commonly discussed topic in the broader media now.
Well, that's a little more humble and kind, perhaps, to comparison to Jerome Powell than I was being, but yes, as David Stein, who you just heard, has joined me on the show many times talking about inflation, the reasons why prices were rising, and that Jerome Powell would eventually look quite silly admitting the obvious after it's too late. So with all of that said, David Stein of Kuya Silver, one of the rare unicorns in the planet that has actually been able to figure out how to keep a solid balance sheet silver company together and thrive to take a benefit from the unfortunate circumstances which will drive the silver price higher. So, David, great to have you here today, and how's everything going with you?
Thanks, Chris. We're doing a lot of great things with our project in Peru, and we've had a very eventful and positive past few months with the project. Company's doing well, so there's obviously a lot bigger issues in the world today, but overall, I'm very happy with what's going on our side.
Well, and I sure appreciate that you're able to figure out all these things because, as we said, it's not the easiest environment for a lot of the silver companies, and we will touch on some of these specific developments in Kuya perhaps towards the end of our call today. Although to dig into the current theme, certainly you can address how this impacts Kuya, but, also just silver companies in general, where now that oil is soaring, now that I hear wheat is up 8% a couple of days in a row, every commodity on the board is flying, and at least according to my economic model, that's not good news for the silver price because that's eating into margins. So with all else being equal, which of course isn't quite the case, but still, that means higher cost, there's less economic incentive. And I would think either the price is going to rise of silver or else the supply is coming down with this type of inflation, which doesn't seem anywhere end in sight. But why don't you take it from there and you let us know what you're seeing, David?
Look, I think over the next few years, inflation is going to be a big factor in the mining industry in general, and so it's definitely going to make it's for some of the more marginal projects out there. It's going to make those projects really tough to get off the ground, if at all. So it's one of those things that sort of counterbalances how higher metal prices. I think we're going to see that, and it's if anything, it's probably positive for the silver price because it's gonna limit the amount of supply growth that we see over the next few years.
So what happens, let's say for the moment the silver price stays where it is. You touched on this a little bit, harder to get some projects off the ground. I'll bet in a lot of cases, someone who might have decided to start a silver company says, well, I'll just pass with the current dynamics. But, I mean, if the price stays where it is, how does that filter through? I mean, if you could go in a little more detail on that.
Sure. Well, look, I think there's two big things you need to think about when you're thinking about inflation in mining projects. Number one is just the actual cost of basic inputs going up. Okay, so things like you mentioned it earlier, fuel prices. That's if those prices go up, it costs us more. How much more depends on the project, but that is a factor. The other thing that I think a lot of people kind of maybe don't realize is that for the most part, regardless of what metal you're mining, a lot of the services and goods and equipment that you use in the mining industry, it's common across the whole sector. So it sort of doesn't matter if you're mining gold, nickel, silver, whatever, you still need the same, machinery, drills, etc. So what we're in now is looks like, I think we're starting a sort of another commodity super cycle where not only are we going to have inflation from input prices, basic input prices, but also from competition from other mining subsectors that are going to be competing for labor, competing for equipment that we need, and that's going to drive prices up as well. So what that means, from an investment point of view, is that projects that are already very high margin obviously can preserve their margins better than a project that's marginal or hardly, which has very little profit. Second of all, smaller projects that are, require less capital are going to be more easily financed. They're going to be less susceptible to big swings in capital costs or operating costs. And so, that, to me, that's the ideal place to be, to get exposure to the mining sector, but without any of the really big, surprises where my CapEx just went up by $200 million or something like that. A project like ours in Peru, that kind of thing won't happen because it's some might say it's too small, but in reality, it's sort of the perfect size to withstand, these types of inflationary impacts.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if things stay the same and you say, well, all right, you're going to have supply going offline, then there's kind of a ticking clock. Well, I mean, you're already running a deficit in the market. But then on the other hand, once money starts coming in, the price goes up a little bit. We saw last year during Silver Squeeze when it goes over 30. So it's almost like an environment where you have nothing, which exacerbates the situation. And by the time there's any sort of relief, it's like too much relief that brings attention and also would push the price up. So it's kind of like a frustrating situation, but the longer it goes on is almost guaranteeing when it does move, the price is going to move even further. Is that how you're looking at it as well? Does that make sense from your perspective?
Yeah, if you take that kind of line of thought and you turn it into more of the, you think about it more as a mine operator, it makes sense as well because, we all know that it takes, years to get a new project off the ground. If you're already in production, great. You're going to benefit from higher prices immediately, and as long as you're not hedged, and that's obviously great. But, there's a lot of projects that are in development and, exploration projects, etc. And those are going to be very, very hard to get off the ground in, this kind of inflationary environment. And what that means is that demand will grow much faster than supply. And that's when you can have, the silver price go up a lot. It could double or triple in price. We've seen it in other metals. It's like, it's not even, I think sometimes in the precious metals business, and, we feel ashamed for giving ourselves, high price targets of, $50 or $75 or $100 for the price of silver. But, look at nickel, look at what nickel's done, look at palladium, look at, pretty much any other metal, cobalt. Their prices have all doubled or tripled off the recent lows, if not more. I'm not sure. Nickel might even be 4 or 5x up now. So it can happen. And silver is a pretty small market in terms of the dollar values of silver metal that is actually traded. It's a very, it's a smaller market. It's not nearly as big as gold and copper and some of these, bigger, more liquid markets. So things can move really quickly when they get going.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the same time that the supply is going down, the demand is going up, which I think the demand for physical silver, not SLV shares, has been going up for quite a while, although you're up in Canada, and we were talking earlier today about the situation there where your boy Cynthia Freeland, some very non-investor friendly policies, which, I mean, I'd be pulling my money out of there. What is it like with the environment in Canada, which has kind of gone on the back burner, but certainly that's the kind of thing that really can surge demand depending on how people respond to what they just saw. What could you share about your experience living through that?
Canada's a big producer of certain commodities, certain metals, materials, minerals, and obviously energy. And there definitely has not been it's not been a very favorable environment at the federal level for that. Although some of the provinces can be quite friendly to mining and resource development. So a little bit like other jurisdictions like the United States. Sometimes you can have the federal government working against you, but your local government working for you, and I think that's been the case in Canada. Some of these bigger projects need the help from the federal government. So that is it's not something that we at Kuya are deliberately dealing with, but certainly the oil patch in Western Canada and some of the bigger minerals projects, they definitely do have to deal with the federal government, so it's been tough.
Although, even aside from the supply side there, what about the demand side? I've met of people who are, saying, geez, they just froze bank accounts and maybe have not thought about purchasing gold or silver before, but after seeing that and the shutdown and what the truckers have been doing. So interesting what you mentioned on the supply side in Canada. But in addition to that, what do you see on just people's reaction, and are they getting a little nervous? Are new people entering from your conversations?
Yeah, I know that some of our local bullion dealers here have seen very, very strong, if not record interest in the first couple months of 2022. So I'm sure some of that has to do with the the freezing of bank accounts and that kind of scary stuff that was happening a few weeks ago. Look, it makes a very, very strong case to have some precious metals in your portfolio, no question about it.
I would think so. It'll be interesting.
And I think you look at that the trucker situation in Canada, which was it was obviously a big deal in Canada, but relatively, small event globally. Now you look at for example, the Russia-Ukraine war, all the sanctions that are on Russia. And what I think people can sort of figure out now is in our electronic world, how, quickly people can just flip the switch on you, right? So, it's I think that the case for owning precious metals is getting stronger and stronger.
I would think so. And when you think about how that situation unfolded, I think it was incredibly shocking to most people. Perhaps there were a few that, have seen enough government in their day that weren't surprised at all. Yet, if we're talking about when do the metals really move, at least one potential driver being when mainstream money comes into gold and silver, I don't know what the timeline is like that on something. Maybe someone lives through that and it takes a couple weeks of reflection. Then you have a new, potentially World War III breaking out. So probably a lot going on, but it's not the kind of thing that unhappens itself. And at some point, with what people see going on in the world, hey, there's some people are probably going to sit in their, CIBC bank account for life, or at least as long as they have access to it. But you'd have to think, as time goes by and, even if nothing additional happens, that people would be thinking about it at least a little bit, I would think.
Yeah, look, I think the whole world's been put on notice now that this is an issue, and I don't think we can go back very, I don't think we're going back to, 2016 or 2015, pick a year when everything seemed good and easy in the world. I think we're obviously I don't wish any damage or destruction or loss of life or anything like that on anybody, but I think the harsh reality is that regardless of how the Russia-Ukraine conflict ends up, we've sort of moved past this era where everybody just trusts each other in the international stage and does business with each other. I think unfortunately we're going into a new cycle here where of deglobalization, and in that again it's you can make a very, very strong case that the precious metals are going to play a big role in sovereignty of nations and their central banks and their wealth.
Well, I think that would certainly be a prudent thing to do. Which countries adopt that and at what rate will be interesting to watch. But we shall see how that goes. And David, before we wrap up, certainly be nice to hear an update on Kuya, any specific things that you would like to share since the last time you've been on, but just for the folks that, whether they're already invested or hearing of it for the first time, obviously consult your financial advisor, but for people who would like an update on Kuya, what could you share with them there today?
Well, look, I think really, I want to cultivate long-term shareholders with Kuya. So when you take a step back, and we've had numerous very big press releases in the last few months, but if you take a step back, we're delivering on our development of the expansion, construction of the Bethania mine. We got a really important permit recently, and we're able to move forward with that this year, which is very, very exciting. And then on the exploration front, which is it's also another important part of the sort of leg of the stool when you're running a mining company and a big mining project. the exploration side is going really well. We're continuing to get good results at Bethania near the mine. And then I think more importantly, we've been able to put together a region around the mine now to explore and develop into, and ultimately, I see us probably having a few mines feeding one central mill there. And that's been part of our strategy for years, but we finally were able to really put it together in 2021 with a couple of acquisitions that we made. So we've got a district scale exploration play now. We've got a mine that's very quickly advancing to production. So it's sort of I think a great way to play the silver market with a company that's got growth in production and growth in resources. Really the best of both worlds in the mining sector.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of Goldman Sachs too. Although, David, perhaps you touch on in particular the balance sheet, because that's one thing that I've appreciated, the approach you've been able to take. Again, I know many people have different things they're expecting out of the miners, but as someone who's trying to keep it simple and say, all right, if I can find a project that is run by someone that I trust, they know what they're doing, and can find the asset, but also can manage things so that, here we have the price on the lower side, but you've been able to gain when other people were panic selling, you were in position to be able to benefit from that. And if you could just talk about that for a moment would be good too.
Yeah, look, I think what you're kind of alluding to is that we've been able to first of all be very lean and mean with our company, and just running the overhead, the corporate overhead. So that's we've been able to get stuff done without spending a ton of money in the last year. We were able to have cash on the balance sheet so that when opportunities came to make acquisitions, we were able to go and do it. And we did that in a couple of occasions, most recently in November, where we invested a fair bit. I think it was about $500,000, a little more than $500,000 in a bunch of new properties to acquire around the Bethania mine. So we were able to do that, buy low, as you say, and obviously that's been I think critically important to our story going forward, to have those properties now in our essentially on our balance sheet, and then going forward we will do a project financing for our expansion project, and at some point very soon I think we'll be able to announce details on that. But I mean, until then we're in great shape.
Well, that's certainly good news, especially given the rest of the news that's happening around the world, much of which we've talked about. Although, David, before we wrap up, I got to throw one more in here. I get the Zero Hedge tweets directly to my phone. So sometimes it's funny. Now, I've been being present and paying attention to you, although just towards the end here, I figured to check if there's any news before we wrap up. And I'm going to quickly read through a 6-pack of Zero Hedge tweets that has come in the last 20 minutes while we're recording that I think would sum up the situation nicely. So, first Biden beer here. Biden dispatches team to Maduro's Venezuela, mulls easing Trump-era sanctions. So I'll give my editor comment. Sounds like they're desperate for oil. Now they're even considering reducing the Trump-era sanctions. And if you have comments on any of these, just interject at any moment here. So that's number one, okay?
Okay.
And then number two, U.S. House to vote on removing trade relations with Russia and Belarus, banning oil imports as soon as Tuesday. Now, I'm not sure how Belarus is now involved, but another oil-related one. Then number three, House to hold imminent vote on ditching trade relations with Russia and Belarus, including oil imports. Number 4, Ukraine says no significant results in third round of truce talks. UN reports over 400 civilians killed. Certainly unfortunate and does not indicate that the situation is getting better. Number 5, Nomura, which is a bank, stuff is beginning to break. And then number 6, for the knockout punch, feel free to laugh or cry on your way after this episode. White House mulls Biden visit to Saudi Arabia to plea for more oil. Now, I don't know if he's going to actually go there begging, but that is the Zero Hedge headline, which people will read and make their own opinions of. But I guess I'm glad that you've been able to figure out how to keep a silver company that can withstand this storm, because based on what we've talked about, add in those, it seems pretty clear to me where this is headed. Any final comments on today's news there, David?
Well, look, on the oil side, I guess it seems like the U.S. is being put in the position, or it's putting itself in the position to sort of pick and choose who they want to deal with in terms of trying to get additional oil supplies to the market, and it's kind of interesting, I guess. We'll see what happens there. I'm not sure it makes a big difference to us, and and obviously, the rest of the news is pretty bleak.
Yeah, and I agree. That's the fortunate part. I don't think that will personally impact you in a way that you can't take care of. But for the silver supply, which is already pretty tight, and all the other things going on, I would say I mentioned those stories just because, in my opinion, it reinforces everything you've been saying. So.
Yeah, I think it's more symbolic than anything else, because with respect to the United States anyway, because I think the United States produces a lot of its own energy, and so I think really if Biden's going to Saudi Arabia to try and get more oil, it's really to drive the world price down for everybody, and to take pressure off of Europe and some of those countries that are more impacted by Russia, because really the United States and Canada, for that matter, the amount of oil we get from Russia is minimal. So it's more symbolic than anything, but anyway, that's my read on that.
Well, he might have to take more than his peace dove symbol over there, because there was another story this morning from MBS out of Saudi Arabia where he said he just didn't care about anything Biden did because he just stopped caring. They're so disgusted with it. So we'll see how Joe pulls that one off. I know last week during the State of the Union, he said he was going to fix the inflation situation. Doesn't sound like that's going so well right now. Unless you are a silver investor, and then it gives you plenty to be grateful for. And which, David, I'm going to go touch some silver. I'm going to be grateful for knowing people like you. I certainly appreciate your involvement in the show, and also just our friendship. And I know I've left you a message once or twice saying this before, but, in a culture where there's not a lot of corporate or political leaders that are really the type of person you would want to emulate or call a role model, I just really appreciate the way you handle things and, stay steady throughout a challenging environment and do your thing and continue to put your company in great position. So thanks, as always, for being here, and we'll look forward to catching up again soon.
Well, thanks, Chris, for the compliments. And, we'll happy to chat anytime.
All righty. Well, I'll be looking forward to that. Thanks, David.